Okay, everyone, today we'll be talking about the different genres of fiction literature. But first, I wanted to talk about what the difference is between fiction and nonfiction. So, fictional stories are texts made up by an author that are not true. So, the elements of these stories are that the story is usually made up, its goal is to entertain readers, it tells a story, and its plot has a beginning, middle, and end. While nonfiction texts, their goal is to teach, inform, and explain real things. So the stories are based in true facts. Its goal is to teach readers, and it can be read in any order. But today, we are going to be focusing on fiction instead of nonfiction. So what are genres? So genre is a category of literature determined by the type of writing or content, such as poetry, folktales, or biographies. Like I said earlier, today we'll be talking about fiction genres in particular. And there are many genres of fiction, but today we're only going to focus on 6 of them. So first, we'll be talking about mystery. So mystery are stories involving a puzzling crime or suspenseful event. So it might include strong and compelling characters, it'll have a clear conclusion or resolution to the story, and it'll include evidence that makes sense with the story, as well as evidence that's goal is to distract readers from important questions. Examples of these kinds of books might be the Cam Jansen series or the Kid Spy series. The next genre that we'll talk about is historical fiction. So the historical fiction genre's goal is an entertaining story that attempts to increase readers' knowledge of historical events or a person. So it'll include real places, conflicts, as well as created characters, even if they're talking about a real person. So a lot of the dialogue is going to be created, and it'll include a reimagination of historical events, which might include alternative history. An example of this might be the I Survived series. The next genre is fables. So fables are entertaining stories that usually have a moral lesson. They're short, usually include one simple conflict. There aren't very many characters, and you might even see some animal characters in the story. The vocabulary might be a little old-fashioned, so it'll be a little bit different than folktales and fairy tales, which we'll talk about soon. An example of that is the Little Prince book. Another genre that we'll talk about is fairy tales. So fairy tales are also entering stories that have a moral lesson. They're also short, but they're going to include magic and put you in an imaginary world. Usually there's a problem that has to be solved, and you see the characters maybe having unbelievable powers, and there's a lot that has to do with it, with like good versus evil, and good almost always wins in these stories. An example here is the Great Fairy Tale Disaster. While you might not think initially that that's going to be a fairy tale based on the title, but it does take elements from some traditional fairy tales where good ends up winning in the end. So another genre that you can talk about is fantasy. So fantasy stories are entertaining, and they discuss a journey to a magical world. So these stories also contain magic. They're also unrealistic, put you in an imaginary world with imaginary characters and objects, and also has that good versus evil element. One of the biggest differences is that fantasy, there's usually a quest for characters, and it puts them on a different journey. Some examples of that might be Charlotte's Web and The Witch Boy. Another example of a genre of fiction is science fiction. So these are entertaining stories that suggest something that might happen in the future. It contains elements of scientific knowledge. They tend to be futuristic and put you in imaginary worlds. Usually you'll see things like space travel or labs incorporated into it, as well as scientific advancements. So some examples of books that fall into this category might be A Wrinkle in Time or The Mighty Robot. Okay, that's it. Thank you all for listening today. Email me if you have any questions about what we covered. Bye.